Today on Freedom Alive, fighting for the right to help today's youth hold on to their biblical values despite the growing social pressures they face. Welcome to Freedom Alive. Imagine having to fight for the right to counsel adolescents and teens through a confusing time in their life. Today, you'll meet Dr. Robert Otto, who had to sue a local city and county for the right to counsel teens who desire to align their lives with their biblically held values. The question is, has government overstepped its role when it enters the privacy of a counseling session to interfere with the client's right to receive biblical counseling that can save their lives? My co-host Matt Staver is here and will share this interview, plus give us an update on other attacks on our freedoms in America. Matt, welcome. Today, you'll be interviewing Dr. Otto. Can you give us a brief description of the battle he was facing in his practice?
Well, Dr. Otto is one of the many counselors that we have represented around the country, and they engage in a lot of different varieties of counseling, like Dr. Robert Otto does, a wide variety of issues with young people, older people. And counselors are like a GPS. They actually help a client reach their objective to align their value system with the struggles that they face. But he had to sue the city of Boca Raton, Florida, and Palm Beach County because they passed ordinances that said you can only give one viewpoint with regards to same-sex attractions. And even when a client wants to have a different viewpoint to align their biblical values with the struggles that they have and change those struggles to be in line with their values, he was prohibited from doing so. So we ended up filing suit. We went to the Federal Court of Appeals, and we ultimately won an amazing victory, but the case is far from over. This battle is going on around the country, Steve.
I can't wait. Stay tuned. Our Freedom Update is next.
Anyone who has ever experienced counseling knows that it's a private, sensitive situation. You don't want the government coming into the privacy of a counseling room and telling you what kind of counseling you may or may not receive. And especially don't want the government telling the counselor that even though you want a certain kind of help, that counselor is prohibited from giving you help. And that's exactly what's happened with Dr. Rob Otto and many others around the country. Robert Vazzo, who we represent, both of these counselors are in Florida, and both of these counselors encountered the same situation, along with many other counselors that we represent around the United States. And that is, these are professional counselors. They're like a GPS. When you get into the car, the GPS doesn't tell you where to go. You give the GPS instructions, and the GPS helps you navigate through the traffic and the roads to ultimately reach your destination. Counseling is kind of like that. It's talk therapy, where you just simply engage in talking. And the client comes in to share struggles that they're experiencing, and they want to align those struggles with their values. And they share that with the counselor. And the counselor is like a GPS to help them navigate through the different intersections of life to achieve the ultimate objective. But what some of these cities and even states around the United States have done is they've pushed a radical LGBTQ agenda to say that anyone who comes into a counseling room, the counselor can affirm that individual against their value system, encourage them to go against their value system, to accept unwanted same-sex attractions or gender confusion that they're trying to overcome, but they cannot help these individuals overcome those unwanted expressions, attractions, or even confusion in their life. This is a life and death situation because so many of these people ultimately struggle with their identity, and these counselors are there to provide help. Liberty Counsel, we have litigated these cases all over the United States. We won a major case with regards to Dr. Rob Otto and Julie Hamilton and other counselors like Robert Vazzo in Florida at the Federal Court of Appeals, striking down these laws because they violate the First Amendment right to freedom of speech, and especially the client's right to self-determination, the client's right to set their own objective. and achieve the objective to overcome their unwanted conditions, stresses, and anxieties. But this battle is still going on around the country, and we're litigating across America. The bottom line is the government has no room in a private counseling session to tell you that you can only receive a viewpoint that you don't want. Imagine, for example, getting into a car. You program your GPS to go to a certain direction, and it'll take you wherever you want to go, except there's one particular destination that it will always take you 180 degrees in the opposite direction. How frustrating would that be? That's exactly what these laws do. These laws prohibit these people from experiencing true freedom in Christ. So we're going to continue to litigate. We're going to stand with these families that desperately need and seek this life-saving counsel, and also with these counselors all over America. And one of our cases may likely go back to the United States Supreme Court.
Matt, thank you. At home, I'm drawn to the objective of this show, which is peace, hope, and truth amidst a very confusing time. And I cannot think, as a parent of four with two teenagers still at home, of a more challenging time for a teenager than their teen years and all of the cultural pressure that is against them. So, Matt, as I listen to that freedom update, it seems almost unthinkable to me that there could be this sort of legislation that would interfere with counseling when a young person wants to align with their biblically held values.
It's really shocking, Steve, because we work with a lot of counselors and their clients. And imagine yourself as a parent, and your son or daughter, whether they're adolescent or teen, comes to you and they express certain struggles that they're experiencing, whether it's their identity, whether it's certain attractions that they're experiencing, or what they just saw and experienced at school or among their peers. And they're having difficulty because of that communicating with their peers and even with their parents, but they finally reach out and they seek your help as a father. And you find the best Christian counselor that is able to help your son or daughter. But when you take that young, precious child there to get help, the counselor tells you, I can't help you in this area because the law says I can only push you in a different direction that you don't want to go, but I can't help you achieve real freedom in Jesus Christ from these struggles. And that is the tragedy, and that's why this is a life and death issue for so many people around the country.
I completely agree. It is a life and death issue, and at home, I know you're going to enjoy this interview with Dr. Robert Otto.
Well, Dr. Robert Otto, I'm glad to have you here on the set. And it's always a privilege, obviously, to represent you in this case that we have ongoing, in which we won a major case around the United States with regards to counseling. But in your practice as a professional licensed counselor with your training and experience, tell us what actually takes place in a counseling room. Some people may have a mystery of what happens in a counseling room, but what actually occurs between you and the privacy of the client that you're counseling?
Sure, Matt. It's good to be here with you. In counseling, people come with their goals. They have things that they want to achieve or change in their life, or issues they want to work through and heal. And so it's an opportunity to facilitate that, to walk them through those challenges and to help them accomplish those goals or change the things that they want to change.
I've kind of used the analogy that a counselor is like a GPS, where the client actually sets the direction, and you help that client reach that objective. You don't force them to go in an opposite
Correct.
180 degree. Like if somebody is struggling with infidelity, you don't counsel them to actually engage in infidelity.
Correct.
You're going to counsel them to overcome that stress in their life and align their values with their biblical system of Judeo-Christian beliefs.
Absolutely. And a lot of times we have clients who'll come in and they'll understand from their faith and their understanding of God's word what they need to be doing, but they're having a problem living that out. And sometimes they just need some tools, some skills, some guidance, somebody to walk a journey side by side with them. But certainly counseling is not something that where we force on clients our own desires or opinions of what we think their lives should be. It's their desires.
So the right of a counselor and a client is always client focused, where they have the right of self-determination to
That's correct.
set their ultimate objective.
That's correct, yes.
So that's the way it has always been, right?
Yes.
And that's the way it is in every area of counseling.
Yes.
Except for one.
Yes, except for this one.
And tell us about your experience with the law that was passed in Boca Raton, Florida, and Palm Beach County, Florida, where you have counseling practices there.
Right. Well, the ordinance forbid me from having a conversation with minors who have unwanted same-sex attractions. And that's confusing because I'm allowed to have conversations with them about anything else except this one topic. Well, actually, that's not true. I am allowed to have conversations with them if I want to help them steer in that direction of staying in a homosexual or a lesbian or some kind of a lifestyle like that. But I can't have a conversation if their goal is to go toward a heterosexual lifestyle to line up with what their faith is and what they believe.
So someone comes in, they're struggling with unwanted, I'm talking about, and I want to underline, unwanted same-sex attraction.
Correct.
They're coming in and they don't want these feelings in their life.
Correct.
And sometimes this can happen through sexual abuse. Sometimes it can happen when they see something or perhaps even experience something in school or on television. And they come to you and they have these struggles and they don't want to identify themselves as gay or lesbian or transgender. They need help.
Yes.
And in this case, you were not permitted to help them overcome those unwanted attractions, but you could only tell that client something completely opposite of what they were trying to escape from or trying to experience freedom over.
Correct. And it was a elected body deciding for the client what their lifestyle should be. And the client had no opportunity to say, but that's not what I want. And it's interesting, this was supposedly child abuse. If I had those conversations with a child to help them to go back toward what they saw as aligning with the biblical values that they had. But the ordinances left out things like parents having those same conversations. It was child abuse if I spoke with them about these issues, but not if a parent or a teacher or
A pastor.
A pastor.
So in other words, a licensed professional trained counselor
Correct.
could not engage in this kind of counsel to help someone overcome these unwanted attractions because they wanted to go after the license first.
Correct.
And once they gained a foothold there, then the next thing is the pastor. The pastor can't, because the pastor is not trained in counseling. So if it's harmful for a licensed person to counsel, then it's even more harmful for an unlicensed person to counsel. And that's the ultimate
Yes.
objective, I think.
Yes, and part of the absurdity of this was in our depositions, we were asked, or we asked the other side, is it permissible for me to have that conversation with a child? And the answer is no. Is it permissible for you to have that conversation with the same child? The answer was yes, because you're not licensed.
Because they didn't have the ability to revoke
shut
my
you down,
license,
right.
but they had the ability to affect
Yes.
your license.
So the question became, is it okay for me to tell you what to say and you tell the child as we're all sitting in the same room? And there was no answer to that
Because they
question.
haven't thought that.
They hadn't
Because
thought
it was
that through.
bureaucrats that were trying to enter into the
Correct.
privacy of a counseling room.
And how is it abusive for one person to have a conversation when it's not abusive for a second person to have the identical conversation?
And Dr. Otto,
doesn't make sense.
you know, I know you've dealt with, and I want to go into this, stories where someone, an adolescent, a teen, is having difficulty with their self-identity. They're going through different stresses in their lives. They may question, are they a boy or are they a girl? They may see something on TV that conflicts with their biblical values. And then they have conflicts with their peers. And then they have conflicts with their parents because of the stress.
Yes.
And then they finally ask their parents, I need some help. And the parent comes to you. And how frustrating would it be for you, as this law actually prohibited you at the time, since we've now been able to get an injunction or a court order against it, prohibits you from actually helping that stressed teen or adolescent.
Yes.
And telling the parents that the law says I can't do it.
I equate that to being able to go to your medical doctor with a sore throat and get antibiotics. You can't imagine the local government saying that your doctor can't prescribe antibiotics for you for that strep throat. That would be totally inconsistent with medical care.
Tell us about some of the experiences of counseling young people, and
Sure.
how did these unwanted attractions in some of your experiences develop?
Sure. In our in my practice, in counseling practices, we see a lot of different influences that lead in this direction. You mentioned abuse. Sometimes that leads to confusion, family experiences. Imagine just going through, walking through the living room and headed to the garage to go, get a basketball out of the garage. And there in the living room is a television that's on, and there's, two guys kissing or two ladies kissing. And that plants a thought, I wonder what that feels like. And that young child then walks for many years trying to make sense of that confusion and his Christian faith or her Christian faith. Imagine a child who's at a friend's house, and best friend leans over across the couch and kisses her or kisses him, and unwanted, violated for sure. But it starts to plant the seed like, well, but I mean, I like this person, this is my friend. But that felt kind of, like I've never kissed anybody before. That felt kind of good, and I'm confused. How do I make sense of this? But I think this is wrong from what I know in my Bible, and I've not been raised to I don't know how to handle this. And kids cannot handle issues like that alone.
Yeah.
And so those are opportunities then to come alongside them and walk them through and help them make sense of life and the experiences that they've had.
And pornography. I know we don't like to think that our children have been exposed to pornography, but I can assure you that it is more widespread than you think. And it may be unintentional. It may be they got some sexting from a friend,
yes,
with a picture, and
it's
they don't
common.
know. And they open it up, and lo and behold, there it is, and they're exposed to it. And when you have someone of an adolescent or teen exposed to pornography at any level, it can become very addictive, and it imprints on their brain in a way,
yes,
I think, that is much different than even an adult.
Yes.
It sticks with them.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And how we handle that as parents, number one, we get angry at that because we don't want that to happen to our kids. But the way kids can perceive that is, you're angry at me. And we have to be very careful that we handle that situation. I told my sons and my daughter, I said, when you see pornography, not if, but when, this is what I want you to do. I want you to come tell me. And that'll be really awkward, but I just want you to come tell me. And I want you to know this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to praise you. I'm going to say, I'm so proud of you for coming to talk to me. I'm so proud of you for doing that. Number two, I'm going to pray for you. God, would you clear his mind? Would you clear her mind of these pictures that are there? And would you replace them with purity? And number three, we're going to go plug that hole together. If we had a hole in a pipe in the bathroom, and every time you flush the toilet, if it puts sewage in the living room, we want to plug that hole. So we're going to go plug that hole together. And they knew from a young age that that's how we were going to handle this issue when it came up. And it makes it easier for kids to approach the parents then.
You said when, not if. And I want you to hear that. When, not if.
8 years old. If you can keep your kids past 8 years old without seeing pornography, you have accomplished a great deal.
So this young person that ultimately got confused by seeing these people kissing on television ultimately came to you eventually, and you've counseled people like this that are going through these struggles. What ultimately is going on with some of these young people that come to you for help?
Sure. There are young people who are exposed early on in their life, and then there's a separate issue of people who've walked this lifestyle for many, many years. And the journey's different for those two groups. So you asked about a young person who's exposed to this and is struggling with making sense of how do I deal with these feelings. That young person would need to understand that there is an absolute truth that is outside of what society says is true. We talk about, the end of the book of Judges. Everybody did what was right in their own eyes. God says that there is right that does not depend upon me. And it does not depend upon anybody here on the earth. It depends upon him and his character and how he's created us as men and women. And we're distinct, and we're supposed to have relationships in marriage that are one man and one woman together for a lifetime commitment, a mutual commitment for a lifetime. So a child, a young person who is exposed to this and has questions often needs to go back and say, okay, I understand why I have those questions, and I understand where society is leading, but I also understand what God's word says. And how do I deal with the feelings and the emotions that come with that? Because that's not information. That's how do I deal with my feelings. And how do I deal with my emotions and the confusion that's there of making sense of this and yet that, but they collide.
So what do you say in the final moments of our time together for a parent, a grandparent, who has a son or daughter, grandson, granddaughter, that's struggling with their identity?
I would say, number one, give them hope. Tell them you love them. And be very careful not to send a message that they're bad or that you shame them. They've already got that message deeply ingrained because of the confusion they're experiencing. And get them a counselor to talk to, a safe person that has a biblical worldview that can walk them through these issues. Because God does heal, and God does bring wholeness back into our lives in these issues. And we don't need to be scared about the journey that God walks us on. He says He'll never leave us or forsake us. And this doesn't surprise Him. And so we can trust that He's still sovereign and He's still God right here. And these are valuable and precious people that are your family members. And they just need help. And so love them through it.
And not all Christian counselors are created equal, if you will. Just because somebody is a Christian counselor, be careful about trusting your son or your daughter, your grandson, your granddaughter to that counselor on this particular issue. Because I do know some Christian counselors, and they may well love the Lord, but they're trained in the whole secular mindset. And they're fearful of even trying to help somebody escape these unwanted attractions. And I know Christian counselors that have actually pushed these young people in the direction that is contrary to the Bible, contrary to their biblical values, or even refuse to help them.
And you
need
make
to get a
sure-
Christian counselor who has a good worldview like you,
Yes.
but who's also experienced in this particular area.
Yes, if you go to a medical doctor, you're not going to go to a dermatologist
Right.
to get your heart fixed. They're both doctors, but they have specialties in different areas. So find a counselor who has experience on this particular issue, but make sure it's a biblical worldview on this issue, and walk with them.
Well, thank you, Dr. Otto. This has been
pleasure.
Amazing, and just a pleasure to work with you.
Good.
And continue our journey together as
you,
we
Matt.
continue to work and you continue to work to bring real freedom and real truth and liberation to these young people, to people of all ages, and certainly their families.
Yes, and thank you for Liberty Counsel, what you all are doing on this issue. Make a difference.
Matt, that was fantastic. Dr. Rob, it was great. As a parent, I'm watching that with so many emotions. And one of the things that Dr. Robert said that struck me was the inevitability, the when, not if.
Not if.
Right? So how do we protect our families in this cultural, fast-moving water that our kids are facing every day?
Well, Steve, I think that's a good question, and I think Dr. Otto really addressed that, and that is to have these conversations before they happen. And it's not just for parents. Churches also have a role in here as well, because we take a lot of young people to Israel on a life-changing experience. And one of the things that we find is that there's nothing in the school, and oftentimes there's nothing even in the church itself that's helping them to connect to these real issues that they're living with Monday through Saturday. And when they leave church on Sunday, what they experience as well. So make sure you have some of these conversations. They're difficult conversations to bring up front, but I think you can do, say, the pornography in the context of God made us incredibly in His image, and He made us male and female, and He doesn't make any mistakes.
It's fantastic. Proverbs 4:23 tells us, guard our hearts, for out of it flows our life story. I'm reminded of that as I listen to this interview. So Matt, let's talk about the real agenda behind this, right? We've talked about on previous episodes, especially during the pandemic, the spikes in suicide, in abuse, in depression. Against that backdrop, how could anybody push legislation like this that is, going against trying to help our kids and our loved ones and our families?
There's an LGBTQ agenda, and I use the word agenda, not regarding individual people, because God made everybody in His image, and all things are possible with each individual, and never, ever, ever give up on your children and grandchildren. Prayer is an incredible tool that God gave us, and a weapon to be able to pray for our children and our grandchildren, and our children, whether we have children or grandchildren, in our community, in our nation, It all goes back to what I said before. God created us in his image, and that marital relationship of husband and wife becoming one, being able to procreate within that beautiful relationship where human sexuality is a blessing and a design from God, not only to unify, but also to bring another human being in God's image and that spiritual component. What ultimately happens? Well, abortion eliminates that beautiful creation of a human in God's image by destroying a life after sexual relations. And LGBTQ destroys the actual individual itself. So abortion is taking a human life or having human sexual relations without the consequence of procreation. LGBTQ is engaging in deviant sexual relations without the possibility of procreation, all of which are directed at our understanding of who God is. And it literally at the core is a rebellion against God in an attempt to abolish who God is. And God has the best plan for us. And that's why there's this agenda to literally trap people with change. Jesus said that he has been anointed to set the captives free, to break the chains of whatever it is, addiction or whatever it may be, that surround us, not keep us in those chains.
Fantastic. Thank you. Guard your hearts, guard our hearts, for out of it flows our life story. This is a very, very important issue. And we want to shift over to get involved, Matt. We want to be able to talk with families, those who are watching, about great ways that they can engage and make a difference on this issue.
Well, obviously, have the conversations with your children, your grandchildren, and have open communications. I mean, that's the key. You know, don't get them addicted to social media and cell phones and go out to restaurants where nobody's having a communication with them. Put that away. Make intentional efforts to communicate and keep those lines of communication open, because it's very, very important at all levels, but certainly among adolescents and teens. And for pastors and churches and church leaders, make sure you become very, very intentional, not just with adolescents and teens, but even for those that are younger, to minister to them and really connect with what they're experiencing in their daily lives. And don't have anything where you think, well, they're just not involved in that. They're not exposed to it. I guarantee you that they probably are, whether you know it or not. Not everybody, but make sure you have intentionality. And then if you need someone who is a counselor, make sure you get a Christian counselor who's experienced, if you're having or know somebody who's having this kind of an issue of unwanted same-sex attractions. And you can contact us, and we have resources there available for you on the screen. But make sure you reach out early.
Well, that's it for today, but be sure to tune in next week. Each week on Freedom Alive, we'll alert you to new government overreaches and update you on existing battles. We'll tell you about the victories people of faith are winning and how you too can fight back and get involved to keep your freedom alive.